I'm not sure I fully understand what depersonalization derealization disorder is, but I'm also not sure that anybody else really does either. Um, it is a way of seeing the world and a way of encountering the world. And, it's a feeling. I guess maybe the most succinct way to put it is it's a feeling of being disconnected from other people, either because you have a suspicion that you're not real, or you have a suspicion that the world isn't real, or you know that you and the world are real, but it just doesn't feel right. There's a sort of an uncanny feeling to everything. Some people deal with it episodically, some people deal with it in different ways. People have long-term experiences with it, short-term experiences with it. The first time I experienced depersonalization and derealization disorder and was aware of it was when I was a senior in high school. I was just about to go to college, and it was at the same time as a really profound depression that I entered into, and I didn't quite recognize what it was as distinct from the depression. My sense also is that it and depression chase each other around a lot. Um, I also had been using drugs at the time, not very heavily, but I'm very, always, it was always, I guess, a real fear that I was going to lose my mind even long before anything happened to me. And I think one of the ways that I processed it was I thought that I had gotten high and stayed high, which was not the case, but I worried that I had somehow injured myself, which, again, not the case. But it coincided with a period of tremendous turmoil in my life. I was a very worried kid, and I had a lot of anxiety as a child, and I was in therapy from pre-adolescence into early adolescence. And then I stopped going, and I was pretty well adjusted, and I had, some stuff in my life, and my junior year of high school into my senior year of high school, I sort of figured out how to stop doing a lot of the things that had made me not very happy. I'd figured out how to work. I figured out how to I was in a great place. I had good friends. I was not depressed. I was not unhappy. I was not anxious. I was doing really wonderfully. And then at the end of that period, everything fell apart. And I went into a really profound depression. And the depersonalization and derealization started up. I never really had much of the depersonalization effect, but the derealization effect was terrible. And it was this feeling that everything was behind glass, or everything was a dream. I I had for a while, I convinced myself that I had fallen asleep and that everything had happened since then was a dream. And I knew where and when I was asleep, and I just couldn't wake up. I tried not to focus on it, and then it would always sort of linger in the back of my mind. I don't know the extent to which it ever went away or didn't. There were certain periods of my life in early adulthood that were very fine, that I was doing really well. And I don't think that the derealization was there. And then there were periods when especially when I would start having other anxiety and depression issues, that it would start coming back, and there was always this like throbbing shame aspect to it, this idea that I had done something to myself, that I had been careless, that I had thrown away my life somehow. And it wasn't until I started psychoanalysis in my mid-30s that I actually talked to anybody about it and learned that it had a name. And slowly, and again, I've danced in and out of wanting to know more and being really afraid of it, but I think I've come to understand, as I let myself explore it a little bit more, how much of a defense it is, and how emotionally determined it is, and how much it's about shame. It's about evading the world by pretending that the world doesn't exist. There's this real tendency to try to look for organic reasons that we have mental illness. And I think there's a lot of truth in a lot of that. But I also think that we too much discount the purely emotional, and this is it is a means of circumscribing the world and saying this isn't real, so therefore it's not something that I need to interact with in the way that I find so distressing. And since that, I have become vastly more okay with all of it, and it's been a really wonderful sort of revelation. Recognizing that shame is shame rather than that it's some totalizing thing that has power over you is a really strong thing. And I think that DPDR is bound up in that, at least for me. I don't necessarily see it as a binary condition against my normal experience of the world. So I would say I experience it either more or less at any given time. I haven't had a really severe episode in a very long time. But every once in a while, it's kind of strange. It sort of always lingers at the edge of my consciousness, and if I focus on it, then I have it again. And if I don't, then I'm like, but, it's an odd way to go through the world, thinking about how you're thinking about how you're perceiving. Most of the time I'm like, I'm late for this, and I need to do that, but I mean, it's there. It's always there in some form or another. But it really feels like a habit of mind more than a condition that it's taken a long time to realize that I actually don't think anything's broken with it. And I also, you asked when it first onset, and I think the only way to talk about it onsetting is talking about noticing it, because I think that it had been there a lot in earlier times, and I think that it was a component of a lot of the anxiety that I had as a very small child. I just didn't know what that was. I mean, I didn't know what it was until 5 years ago. So again, I guess the question is, when was it last really distressing to me, which would probably have been about 2 years ago, I guess, just the winter going into before the pandemic. I started having a lot of sort of intense stuff in my mind. I think that was the last time it was really there. I am to some degree derealized right now. I don't know how to put it. It's a means of establishing a distance between yourself and the rest of the world. And that can take different forms. It can be brought on by different things, and it can be determined in different ways. And sometimes it's distance from yourself that you need to have, which might be the depersonalization, that you have to understand yourself as being outside of yourself in order to have any peace with what's going on inside your head. This is a condition that comes and goes, that people live with, that so many more people have than you know about. It's very hard to recognize that it's not an affliction, it's not a curse, it's not a disease. It is an intrinsic part of who you are. You are doing it to yourself, with yourself, as yourself. And it's not even necessarily a negative, except that it can be extremely scary when it's happening. But it's just life. There's a million ways to be miserable. This is not a bad one, but it's so much about wanting connection with other people and not feeling like you're ever going to have it, because you can't have connection, because there's that wall of glass in between you and the people that you wish to connect with. It begins with an imaginary past that didn't actually exist, where you believe that at one point you felt very connected to everybody and to the world, and that has now gone. So for me, the main experience of it was just this feeling like I couldn't get to the place that I was supposed to be, that there was some metaphysical state that I had been in that I wanted to get back to, that was my natural, true way of being in the world, and that I was severed from that by misadventure or by, my own failure to be the right person, which is, again, what it's about. It's about the shame that it causes, which I suspect is one of the reasons that it's not a thing that more people talk about and know about. It feels like you're in a house of mirrors and you can't quite get out, and you're like, and nothing that's going on around me is wrong in any way. It just all feels wrong. It all feels uncanny. It feels distant. And, when it's bad, you want to hide, you want to get away from people. And that's the sort of cruel paradox of it, is that really what you want is to be in contact with people. But because you are denied that by this thing that's going on, you then run away. I have not talked about my experiences with other people as much as I probably should. But it was a thing, I think, again, any issue of mental health is so hemmed in by shame that becomes a barrier. And there's sort of a fear that by talking about it, you'll somehow make it real. Like maybe if you just leave it alone, it'll go away of its own accord. And that, unfortunately, just gives it more power. So I've started talking about it much more. And again, there's always this fear. There was a fear in talking to my therapist about it, that they would say, "Oh, yes, no, this is a grave, terrible predicament. You've really fucked yourself up and you're never going to be the same again, and this is that." And of course, that's not what happens either. So much of it is manifested by fear, and fear makes it very difficult to talk about. And so I have taken pains to speak more openly about it in recent times, not only because I think there's a lot of people who are probably experiencing this and didn't think anybody else was, but also, it makes the power that it has go away, because, it's just a thing. It's not some totalizing, limiting thing. You have these fantasies that it's going to prevent you from living the life that you want to live, and it isn't. It never is. And it's not going to prevent you from experiencing the life you way you want to experience it. It's not going to prevent you from loving people. It's not going to prevent you from any of that stuff. It's just a way of your mind establishing itself as different from things that it finds frightening. Do I know anyone else who has DPDR? Not personally, that they have acknowledged to me that they have. I suspect that I know some people who have suffered from it at various times. I've had friends who've reported experiences of derealization. This is before I really knew what it was, so I wasn't like, "Oh, hey, that's DPDR." But I don't have a community of people that I'm part of that have this. To make myself more comfortable when I'm having an extreme episode, I just sort of ride it out, I guess. I've learned to give myself permission to not. I think a lot of the time, the really extreme episodes come in times of high stress. And I think I've learned as I've gotten older that the best way to deal with stress, if it starts becoming toxic, is to take a step back, give yourself permission to take a breath, take a break, and contextualize it. It's like, if I don't get this thing done, the world is going to end. No, if I don't get this thing done, it's going to be a mild pain in my ass. But yeah, for a long time, I would just sort of sit there and be terrified, which is it's not a strategy I recommend for other people. And it still happens. Still occasionally, from time to time, I'll have, life is sometimes scary. The big change in the last couple of years for me was really just coming to understand how my brain was processing the life things that I was in. It feels, honestly, and there's still a lot of embarrassment to talk about the drug aspect of it, but the story that I told myself at the time was like, this popped up because I was using drugs, which I was not really. I was, not smoking nearly enough pot to cause any sort of harm. But apparently I had some feelings about it. I somehow missed that actually the thing that it coincided with was the end of my adolescence, or the end of my high school time, going off to college. But there were other things, and not to get like too, I don't know how relevant this is to anybody else. My parents split up when I was in 10th grade, and I made a very conscious decision not to have any feelings about it, which is a really bad idea. And this sort of halcyon period that I was sort of talking about before, this period where everything was great and groovy and wonderful, was an extreme defense against feeling the things that I was actually feeling. And the thing that actually brought on the DPDR was the inability to keep sweeping all of that under the rug. I had to deal with my feelings, and when they came, I was not ready to deal with them, and so it became depression, DPDR, and just a lot of needless suffering. There's a lot of regret and a lot of anger that I had, and I think, for a while, what I was, not just about DPDR, but about depression and about certain things that I'm dealing with in my life still, there was really this temptation to be like, don't waste all the time that you were going to waste being upset about this stuff, being afraid of it. But now I actually don't think that that would be helpful either. And I think, paradoxically, I needed all of this time and all of these experiences to really understand myself and to understand the world. And I'm not really on the schedule that I initially imagined, but I also think I'm doing really well, and I'm learning things that I never would have learned if I hadn't gone through the challenges, struggles, disappointments, fears, yada yada, that I went through. So what I would say to my younger self, I guess, is you're going to be okay. You will be happier the sooner that you come to understand that you're not screwed up, or that you're, at any rate, screwed up only in the way that every human is. And that it's okay to be screwed up. Maybe it's always a dance of that. It's, am I bad? No. Well, maybe a little bit, but you can't ever not be bad. Only good is an impossibility. So, you take the good with the bad, you take the complicated with the simple, and just accept yourself and try to be as much help to others and to yourself as you can be. And I don't know, maybe don't let fear rule you, but maybe you learn from having fear rule you. The advice that I have for people who experience DPDR is to seek love in whatever way you can find it. First, understand that this is not going to rule your life if you don't let it. Then understand that there are a lot of people who have this, probably some people that you know. Then understand that there are people who are talking about it who can help you to understand what it is to you, what it is doing in your life, what you're maybe even supposed to learn from it, which I think is part of it also. And don't give it any power that it doesn't already have, because you don't need to. It's just a waste of energy to obsess about it. And all that it wants to do, all you want to do when you're in it, is to obsess. So it's also, don't judge yourself for that. But recognize that there are a lot of people living with this, wonderful lives. And there are people here to help you. It does go away. It ebbs. It flows. You are not separate from other people. You are not going crazy. You're not disappointing people. Nobody can see this on, like, you're not wearing this. You think you walk down the street and everybody must see you as alien as you feel they are. And that's not the case. So the advice that I would give is seek out the people you love. Give yourself permission to be very imperfect. If you have conflicts that you can't deal with, don't deal with them yet. Make that an aspiration. All the pressure that you're putting on yourself to solve all of these problems, and now that you think you're alone and in the middle of a labyrinth, That's not really what's happening. Seek out the people you love, and everything will be fine. And this will make it hard to seek out the people you love. That's the tragedy of it. But, when it feels like very unnatural to go looking for other people, I guess maybe trust others who say, I've been here before, and go do it. Even though it feels wrong, it will feel right when you do it. And those first days, it's the sort of the equivalent of that first crisp day at the end of the summer, when you can first feel that. When you first feel that the fear is going away and that you are really engaged with life again, I'm not sure I would trade what I go through for simplicity. I like that feeling of being like, I've struggled through this. The night has been unpleasant, but here comes the dawn. That's a great feeling. That's a human feeling. So recognize that you are responding fully normally to the world, and just let it exist. Let yourself exist. And it still all comes down to love. And now I will definitely shut up.